We're really delighted Banyen, we're really delighted to have Leila Stewart here with us today. Leila Stewart is a registered massage therapist.
It's
and
Leila.
Oh, is it Leila? Okay.
We've never spoken.
Yeah,
Only
only
email.
from her bio and email. So she's a registered massage therapist, and she's practiced and taught yoga for more than 40 years. Leila developed and taught an innovative yoga therapy training for 15 years, focusing on experiential anatomy, movement repatterning, and embodiment of the deeper teachings of yoga as a pathway to self-healing. And her book that she's going to be speaking on tonight is Pathways to a Centered Body, and she co-wrote it with Donna Farhi. And so thanks for coming.
All right. Thank you. All right, welcome, and thank you for coming out in the rain. I'm just wondering, how many people here know about the psoas muscle? And how many people work with it? Okay. We titled this talk something about the psoas as a pathway to authentic self or something, and I thought, well, that's a pretty big topic. And the question comes to mind, how can a physical structure actually become a touchstone to your authentic self? And so I thought what I'd do is just tell you a little bit about the history of my work and that's culminated in this book. And then we'll do a little practice, as much as we can do in this setting in a very short period of time. And then there'll be some time for questions if you have any, and then if you want me to sign a book, then I will do that. Yeah. So I have been carrying around a cartoon with me for probably over 30 years. Is that okay? And for some reason, I cut it out in the early 80s from the Calgary Herald newspaper. And it's a Pfeiffer cartoon. And I found it a couple of years ago, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. There's a reason why I've been carrying this cartoon with me since 1983. And I realized that, well, I'll read you the cartoon, and then I'll tell you why. So the first picture is of a man that's got a no center. So the two halves are not connected. And he says, people are always telling me the same thing. Bernard, you don't have a center. They tell me it's okay not to have a center when in your 20s, but you're 45. You've got to find your center. Well, 10 years ago, I did find my center. It was sharp, had white teeth, and ate people. Let those, and as each one of these, he's growing farther and farther apart. Let those who can handle it have a center. I will stick to my edges. And if anyone wants to see that, that's there. And I think that the theme of that cartoon is how this book came to be written, because I was not satisfied with living from my edges, living from my conditioned self. I was very early on interested in what does that mean to live an authentic life, and what does that mean to live an authentic life. And so through it, it's always funny how your life leads you into the places where you need to go. So I've been a massage therapist for over 25 years, and I started doing yoga when I was 19 because of a back injury. And so I've always been sort of interested in the therapeutic aspect of things. And as a massage therapist, I was very interested in alignment, in structure, in movement repatterning, always very interested in movement, not just yoga, but other kinds of movement, and always mind-body movement. And what I found as a massage therapist, that everything seemed to lead to the pelvis. So even if somebody had carpal tunnel syndrome, I would work with their pelvis, and before I ever even touched their arms, it would be 50% healed. And I found the same thing with back problems, and so with my experience as a massage therapist, it was more of a physical thing, but even back then, little bits of the emotional started to come in. So, for example, I had a patient who unfortunately had been sexually abused as a child, and every time she had her period, her left leg would shorten by 1.5 inches. And so it took us a while to figure out what was going on, but it was her psoas muscle. And of course, the psoas muscle is very tied to the fight or flight response. So every time her period came around, it would, at a very deep level, remind her of that time. And we figured out some good stuff so that she could treat herself and release it, and so that wouldn't happen all the time. So that was my first inkling that maybe there was something more to the psoas than just a physical muscle. And along the way, as a massage therapist, a couple of the other things that I discovered is that people with digestive issues would resolve after working with the psoas muscle, and women who had a history of severe menstrual cramps or a history of inability to conceive. This is all anecdotal. There hasn't been any research on it, and I am a bit of a research geek, and unfortunately there isn't. But anecdotally, that seems to have happened a lot, especially people with irritable bowel syndrome. So when I started teaching my yoga therapy training program in 2001, I had to come up with a whole program for people, and I'm not seeing as yet, I know there's a few coming, some previous students, and it's those students and their experience and their trial and error in classes and going away and playing at home and playing in their own classes. It's that feedback that has resulted in this book. Because when I first started working with the psoas muscles, I had no idea that it was so multidimensional. And I got very interested in it because of what was coming back from people. So, as an example, there was a woman in my training who was quite shy, didn't really say very much. And we, in that training, we did probably 25, 30 hours on the psoas. And we were talking at one point about, or people had been sharing about the emotional connections that they had been experiencing over the last several weeks of classes. She didn't say anything, and then after class, she came up to me and she said, "You know, I've been really angry lately." And I said, "Oh, that's probably a good thing for you." And then she said, "Do you think that all of this psoas work might have something to do with me telling my mother-in-law to F off?" She just wasn't that kind of person. But what I have found with this psoas work, that as we start physically, as people start to get a felt sense of their center, because the psoas is the deepest core muscle, that they started to have not only a sense of their physical center, but also a sense of their center on other levels. So becoming a little more emotionally centered, or not reacting so much or responding. And I'm still working on that one. So this protocol has been developed over many years, and it's really the feedback from the students and their own experience and my own experience. I'll just tell you one little story about my own experience. So we had been working with the psoas muscle for probably some weeks in class, and I was getting my photo taken for an ad in the newspaper or something like that. And the photographer came to my house. He took the photograph, and we were standing at the front door talking. And all of a sudden I realized that I had collapsed in myself. And I have kind of male power issues, giving my power up to men. Anyone else know that one? Yeah. And in the moment that I realized it, like in the nanosecond that I realized it, I found my psoas muscles, and all of a sudden we were equals, speaking. Yeah. So that's the transformational power of the psoas, and I know because you haven't had the experience, it's that may sound just like words, but it's not. And I call the psoas muscle a muscle of transformation, because if you sincerely commit to working with this muscle, it will take you down a path that will lead you to yourself, to a sense of being more seated in yourself. And so over the years, this sort of general themes that have shown up are that people, and I include myself in those people, tend to start to feel more grounded, to feel more connected to the parts of themselves that maybe in the past they've disowned. Also creating a sense of reliable self-support. In one workshop I did, and it was only a 4-hour workshop, at the end of it, a woman came up to me and said, I have been so hard on myself for so many years, but in this workshop, with doing this work, I started to get a kind of feeling of warmth inside and wanting to be gentle with myself. So because what happens is that when you get a physical sense of the structure, because it is a really deep structure, and it's a hidden structure, it's underneath all your organs, and like it wasn't even in the vernacular for a long time, except with massage therapists, and they were usually going, and I never did that. Because I found out very, very quickly that if I used a little, like a 1 iota too much pressure, then it would go into fight or flight, and it would push me out. And so I learned to approach the psoas muscles with extreme gentleness, with a sense of, here I am, are you ready to meet me, right? And that's exactly what happens when you start working with your psoas. You actually form a relationship with it. I call that befriending it. And when you do that, that's you. That's you. And so you probably treat your best friend better than you treat yourself, or a lot of us do. And so when you access this structure deep inside of you, and you can feel it, and you can start moving from it, and it gives you information. It tells you when you're, like in that moment with me with that guy, oh, you're giving up your power, Leila. Because it's a sensory, it's got so many sensory nerve endings in it, that it's a sensory organ, really. It's a huge muscle, which I'll demo in a little while. So that's the first thing that people started to find, more grounded, more connected. And it is a connecting muscle physically. So it connects the top of the body to the bottom of the body, the spine to the legs, the core to the periphery, the diaphragm to walking, because the diaphragm and the psoas are very intimately woven together. And that's on the physical level, and then on a deeper level, it ties us into our emotions, connects us into our emotions, especially our instinctual emotions, our primitive emotions, mostly to do with fear, right? So when we're in fear, there's a tendency for the psoas to be kind of locked up. And when we feel safe, then the psoas releases. And when the psoas is released, then it not only moves you, but it also supports you. Because one of the things in the last several years that has shown up in the research is that the psoas is actually more of a spinal support muscle than a mover. And if you look on the internet, every single place you go will say that the psoas is the main hip flexor. Well, the latest research shows that that's actually not the case. There's so many other muscles there that will do that job. So yes, if we can train ourselves to initiate movement from there, then that movement is much stronger and it's core initiated. And we want that, because otherwise the more superficial muscles are doing the job, and then they have to work way too hard, and the psoas muscle then is not doing its job. And so, like Bernard, we live from our superficial self when we're using our superficial muscles. So where you put your mind matters. We know that, right? So when you continually put your mind in your center, then over time you become a more centered person, right? And when you live from there, when you move, when you practice moving from there, then that transformation happens, and you become that person that is less reactive and more responsive. Yeah. So that's the first thing, and that's kind of like a movement from disempowerment to personal authority or spiritual authority. And then the second major theme that seemed to show up a lot was people started becoming more aware of themselves, like I did in that moment. And part of that is because the psoas is a sensory organ. It's about 16 inches long on most people. It's full of fascia, and fascia has more sensory nerve endings in it than muscle tissue. So, and because it's also underneath the organs, it's in that same vicinity as our gut brain. So I don't know the exact mechanism, but I know that there's some kind of connection there, and that if we keep tuning into our psoas muscles, then we tune into our emotional self in a deeper way. Yeah. So more self-awareness, more in touch with yourself, and also because of that, more ability to self-regulate. So that, that's a big buzzword these days with self-regulation and resilience. And self-regulation means that you notice when something is happening, and you know what to do to bring yourself back. And so my thesis is that for many people, that thing to do can be the psoas. Touching into the psoas, feeling how when you're in the psoas, your feet are more on the ground, you're more available. Yeah. So that sort of broad category is more from compensation and reactivity to authenticity. Yeah. So when we're in ourselves, when we're more seated in ourselves, when something happens, then we're more likely to respond, and respond means not react, right? Respond means actually being in touch with what the reality of the moment is and responding to that, rather than, you know, subconsciously or unconsciously coming from a place that's really old. Yeah. So then the third thing that people found is that they became more present. Yeah? Just more present and available to the moment and available to whatever was actually coming at them, instead of arguing with reality or continually wanting it to be different than it actually is. And again, I'm working on this one big time myself. So that category is sort of a shift or a transformation from ego, from living from your ego, which we need, but by ego I mean more our belief systems, our programming, and so shifting from that more to compassionate presence, so to be really present with what's actually going on. So I know that the functioning of a healthy person cannot be reduced to a single muscle. And we still need to do our meditation, and we still need to do all those other things. But even as we're doing our yoga practice or our cycling or whatever it is we do, even reaching up to the cupboard to get a cup, if we come from that, if we can access that place from a felt sense, then it's different. So when movement is initiated from that place, it tends to be a little more strong because it's core initiated, more integrated because you are staying in your center when you do that, and controlled. There's a sense of, and I mean that in a good way, it's safer to do it, to stay connected to your core. And we know that. So I work with experiential anatomy, and what that is I love anatomy, and I love to be able to teach it to people in a way that makes sense to their body. So to learn two-dimensional anatomy and the names of things doesn't really make sense to me unless it's functional for you. So when I teach the experiential anatomy of the psoas, the psoas becomes something that you can regularly touch into. It's reliable whenever you need it. It's there, and it's non-intellectual. So two-dimensional anatomy is quite intellectual, and experiential anatomy takes that, because we need to know where something is. We need to know how big it is and what it looks like and all of that. But how can we have a felt sense of that in our own body in such a way that it can be useful to us, and not just useful in a physical way, but in on all different levels. And in yoga, those are called the koshas. So I'm just going to show you Jolene now, just so you get a sense, for those of you who don't, Jolene, my big skeleton is Joe, and this is Jolene. And the core is a big deal, right? And in the literature, we talk about the core cylinder of support, and that is the pelvic floor. So that's the pelvic floor, and this is my diaphragm, and the diaphragm sits there at T12, L1, L2, and then around the front is transversus, so connecting like a corset all around, and then at the very back we've got multifidus, a deep spinal muscle, and there multifidus is kind of like the laces that pull the transversus like a corset, so that your waist narrows when you're fully engaged. And I kept thinking, well, why isn't the psoas in there? Because it's like a strut, and it joins everything. It joins the diaphragm, respiratory diaphragm, to the pelvic diaphragm. It interdigitates with the respiratory diaphragm. It's also with the transversus, and it's like, well, a strut creates a stronger structure. So why isn't that in the literature? Why isn't that in the research? And it's still not much, unfortunately. So what I have found is that when people learn to access the psoas and then initiate movement from there, and not just initiate movement, but also to activate that muscle by itself as a way of training those muscles, then the movement is safer, stronger, more integrated, and more initiated, and you get to have an experience of your center. Yeah? So the psoas, like I said, is a long muscle. It's about 16 inches. And I've only got 3 therabands here. But really, there are many, many attachments to the psoas muscle. So in fact, it is its own antagonist. So from T12, that's T12 to, let's see, L5, 4, 3, 2, 1, yeah, T12, down to L5, on each side, so there's 2 muscles, of course, on each side, there's an attachment to the body of the vertebra, to the disc between the 2 vertebrae, and also to the little side, the transverse process on the side here. So for each level of the vertebra, there's 3 attachments. So with 6 vertebrae, that's a lot of attachments, and each one of those has a slightly different angle of pull, a slightly different job, because one of the things that the research has found is that the actual muscle cells in different parts of the psoas are different. So some muscle cells are more for long, drawn-out periods of contraction, so the postural muscles, and others more for the quick, fast contraction, so for speed. And so what the research has found is that the deeper muscle slips tend to be more supportive of the spine. The superficial ones more for movement, and the movement is the movement of the hip. But also that the upper ones have more of those postural muscle qualities. So when we can visualize, feel, get a felt sense and visualize the psoas supporting the spine, then we tend not to hold ourselves up so much. Yeah. So it becomes what I call, there's a few seats in here still. So when you can start getting a sense of this and moving from it, then your movement becomes what I call a psoas event. Yeah. So what happens when your body doesn't feel supported from below, from the ground, from the pelvis? It feels like it has to hold itself up. So we get lots of tension in our shoulders, in our neck, in our jaw, and we tend not to use our core muscles well then, or efficiently. So when we get a sense of this deep muscle, then the action is in here. And so we can play with this moving from here, and then this doesn't have to get involved. Yeah? And so once you get the spinal support, and whether that's from the whole core cylinder or from the psoas. I like to just play with the psoas because for me it's really apparent. You know, I've worked with it for so long, I can really feel it. Then your upper body can relax into that support. And when your upper body relaxes into that support, your brain relaxes too. Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, I know that you can't reduce the health of you to one muscle, but it's kind of like family therapy, I think. And that's how I see experiential anatomy. We take one part out of the family for a while, we work with that part, and then when we take it back into the family, the dynamics have changed. And that really happens with the psoas muscle, because among other things, it's the great compensator. So whenever you've got any misalignment in any part of your body, some of those little muscle slips are going to be holding you in that position. So if you have a little, if you've had a car accident and one leg's been jammed up into the socket, and so that leg's a bit shorter, then you get a little scoliotic curvature. Well, the psoas muscle is going to be holding you there. Yeah. So that's one part of it. So one of my students just walked in, and so she's part of it. All my students are part of this, and Sharon especially, because she's really helped advance the work. And so most of us start physically. Yeah, that's an easy doorway to go through. And in the yoga tradition, I don't want to talk too much longer because I want to give you an experience. I'll just talk a little bit more, and then we'll have some experience. In the yoga tradition, the different layers of being or layers of consciousness are called koshas. And traditionally there's 5 koshas: the physical kosha, the energy kosha, the emotional mind kosha, the intellectual kosha, and the anandamaya kosha, or the kosha of bliss, of connection, of oneness. And although that's a tall order, I have found that working with the psoas muscle can move people a bit closer to some of those aspirations. Yeah. So I think I'm going to stop there. Maybe I'll just say one more thing. The way that most people, if you look on the internet, that most people work with the psoas, it's quite harsh. You know, doing great lunges and and what I found, and I really am grateful for my experience as a massage therapist, and having done craniosacral therapy and more subtle work, because it helped me to really understand how to approach a body so that it doesn't go into fight or flight. Mm-hmm. And so what I discovered with the feedback from all of the students' experience is the importance of treating the psoas with the utmost gentleness, the utmost care, the utmost compassion. Because as we work with it, sometimes emotion will come up. It's like sort of like a Pandora's box. But what I've found is that as you do the work, the strength and the resources to deal with that, whatever comes up, happens at the same time as it comes up. So, where was I going with that? that was just an aside. The emotional part of it, and when we in the Vijnanamaya kosher, the intellectual aspect of ourselves, if we set ourselves an intention to become more connected with ourselves, or to aspire to become more connected to other people, then working with the psoas and feeling all of the connections, because it is connected to our legs, it is connected to our arms, it is connected to our breathing, it is connected to our walking. So when we have that awareness in our mind, then we do become more connected people. So I think, so that to me is really what it's about. Oh yeah, I know where I was going now. Yeah, that you have to treat it so gently. And so the work that came up in the protocol is to just start with finding it. So just feeling it in yourself in a super gentle way, and then to soften it. So don't go to strengthening or to stretching, just to soften it and hydrate it first, because mostly it's in a lot of people, parts of it are like beef jerky, right? It's been so contracted for so long that there's another one of my co-authors. That you have to go so slowly with it, and you have to befriend it. And so I actually encourage people when they're starting to work with their psoas to like stroke it and pat it and say it's okay. Yeah. So just like you would treat a scared kid, yeah, because that's exactly what it is. It's a scared kid. And so in order to come out of that fear, you have to approach it just like we know now how to work with people who have suffered trauma. Like a little bit at a time, give the power to that person, and slowly, yeah. So that's the journey of this. And so I always kind of apologize in workshops and say, we're actually not going to do a whole lot of yoga poses, but we will use the yoga poses as a vehicle for integrating these new awarenesses and new experiences. And then you can take it out. But let's use this time, and we'll use this next 15, 20 minutes here, to go into that place as much as we can do in 15 minutes in a bookstore, and you're not on the floor, and just see what happens. So I encourage you to be super gentle with yourself and not poking. So what I'd like to do is first just help you to get a sense of where the attachments are. And then we'll activate it a little bit, and you can palpate it, and then we'll do a little movement. Yeah. So like I said, our diaphragm is very integrated with the fibers of the psoas, and your diaphragm is sitting in your lower, like a calf in your lower ribs. So if you feel your V in the middle of your ribs, and then go down about maybe an inch or an inch and a half, and let's just do one side at a time, and use the soft pads of your fingers, not your pokey fingertips, and then just move out to the side, maybe another inch and a half till you're just below your rib on that side. So somewhere around there, you're going to be able to feel your psoas muscle when we do this stuff, but I'll tell you where the other end is first. So the other end is if you feel your groin crease and open your leg a little bit, and then go about the middle of your groin crease, go down about 1.5 inches, and then if you think of sending your awareness straight back, this is the lesser trochanter here, and that's where the psoas muscle is attached along with the iliacus from the pelvis. So if you send your awareness kind of back towards your sitting bones, because it's deep, yeah? And your spine is halfway between the front and back of your body. So it's right in the middle of your body. So if you take your fingertips on either side of your rib cage and imagine sending your fingers in towards your spine, that's where the psoas attaches. So it's a bit of a mind game doing this, but you'll be able to feel it when it pops up. Okay, so the psoas then goes from that place on the top, the upper attachments, attaches to each one of those vertebrae, and then down into that place on the inner legs there, the lesser trochanter. So just take your hands there to the top and close your eyes and take a moment to tune in as much as you can to that very middle of your body, the spine, halfway between the front and the back, halfway between the right and the left. And on either side of the spine are the attachment, the upper attachments of the psoas muscle. So imagine that you can send your inhalation breath into those upper attachments. And then as you exhale, just slide your hand down the front of your body just so that you get a sense of that's how long it is. Yeah. So you inhale, you get a sense of the upper attachments, maybe even imagine filling them with air. And then as you exhale, just stroking down gently, with a little bit of pressure, down the front of your body to your inner legs, about 1.5 inches down from your groin. Just do that a couple more times. Good. Okay, so like I was saying, the diaphragm and the psoas have a lot of fibers that interdiginate like this. So when you activate a rib breath, and that means sending your breath sideways, then your psoas muscle will pop up. So let's just practice the rib breath a few times. So if you can, take your hands on either side, thumbs around the back, shoulders relaxed. And as you inhale, imagine sinking your breath down to that V between the ribs and sending your breath sideways into your hands so that your ribs expand sideways. Your belly doesn't expand, so you keep a little bit of girdle control on that. And then as you exhale, follow the ribs as they condense toward the center. Do that a couple of times. Okay, then choose a side that you want to work with and find the upper attachment. So your V down about 1.5 inches and then 1.5 inches laterally just below your ribs. And so somewhere around there, you're going to be able to feel the psoas when it pops up. You may need to go a little bit out or a little bit in or a little bit up or a little bit down. But you're sitting, I'm not. So there's 2 ways that we find it. The first way is we take an inhalation
and you might feel something pop up. Yeah, but you take that inhalation into your side ribs. Yeah, and do that a couple of times. And you may or may not think you've got it, but how you tell for sure you've got it is you take your other hand onto your knee and you try and lift your knee up against the resistance of your hand, and then it will pop up even more. Yeah? Can you feel that? Yeah, that's your psoas. And it's coming up all the way from the middle, because it's big. Yeah? It's the filet mignon of you. Yeah? It is. It is the filet mignon cut of. I'm a long-time vegetarian, but it's a really good. It's a really good visual, because if you imagine a 16-inch filet mignon and the size of that and the heft of that, that's what your muscle is, and it's the shelf, the muscular shelf that supports your whole organ system. Yeah? So can you feel that? Yeah. So then you felt it up there. So now go down just a little bit more. Take that wide inhalation into the ribs, and then do the little thing with your knee, the resisted movement, and you'll probably feel it a little bit lower. Yeah? And so just take maybe another 2 or 3 breaths and see how far down you can actually feel it. Each time inhaling, widening the ribs. Yeah.
Excuse me, how do I know that it's not my abdominal?
Because if you go a little bit out to the side, it won't pop up. Or if you go a little bit to the front, it won't pop up. And because the abdominals aren't involved in hip flexion. Yeah. So it's definitely your psoas when you resist that movement. Yeah. So that's your psoas. You're feeling it. That's yourself. That's your strength. Yeah. It's also your stillness. Once you settle it down a little bit. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. So can we stand up? So when that psoas muscle activates, the muscle fibers and the cells. So if this is a muscle at rest, then when a muscle activates, those fibers slide together and the muscle shortens and thickens, and then a bone is attached at one end, and so that bone is going to move because the muscle is pulling it. So when the psoas contracts or activates, it shortens and it pulls the leg up. Yeah? So from this lesser trochanter is going to pull the leg up. So in your mind, imagine that, and you can do this on your inhalation if you want and send your breath sideways because you know that the psoas is going to be activating. But do that, activate, send your breath sideways, and then in your mind visualize those fibers sliding together and lifting your leg up and then letting it down. So visualize the muscle shortening first and lifting the leg up and then letting it down on the exhalation. So your foot's going to come off the floor a little. Doesn't have to come off very much. You can even just come up on your toes. So see what that feels like when you are, well, hopefully consciously activating your psoas muscle. And then do it a few times without that awareness. So just your ordinary way of lifting your foot off the floor. Just saying, well, how is that different? Yeah. And then go back a few times to doing it really visualizing the psoas condensing, shortening, and lifting from that inner leg. Just notice how it's different. Is it different?
Yes.
What would you say is different?
thinking about doing it.
Sorry?
I'm thinking about doing
You're
it.
thinking about
You're more conscious where the sun is.
more conscious where it is,
Just more powerful, more balanced.
more powerful, more balanced.
The
Yeah.
released one feels slack.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you feel different side to side now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I mean, when you're trying to not engage it, I feel like my body goes kind of slack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a sense
And so-
of lifting instead of pulling.
Lifting instead of pulling. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So close your eyes and just take a moment to feel the two sides now. You've just played a little bit with one side. And notice if your weight is different on one side, whether there's an energetic feeling that's different on one side, whether there's some shift in your upper body, maybe even up into your jaw. So just noticing what's different between the two sides. Is there
There's more circulation on this side.
more circulation in that side? Anyone else?
More energy moving up. and
More
down.
energy moving?
More solid?
More
More solid?
more solid.
Here.
Yes. More present.
Yes.
Yay! Good. Okay. Whoops. Sorry about that. Jacob. So just to finish this little practice piece off, let's play a little bit with moving from it. So making a psoas event. So this is what I'd like you to do. First contract it, shorten it, and then lengthen it. So this is how we'll do it. So on an inhalation, shortening it, I'll just show you first. So the muscle is condensing. And then in my mind's eye, I'm sending my leg behind me and I'm making this a psoas event and landing into a warrior one pose, warrior one legs. Yeah? And then to come back, you would flex a little bit and then push off the back leg and come back. Yeah? You want to try that? Okay. So on an inhalation, shorten, just like we did before, shorten the muscle. Imagine it being lifted from that lesser trochanter to the upper attachment, and then sending that lower attachment behind you, lengthening the muscle, making it a psoas event. Good. And then flexing a little, pushing off the back leg, and coming back. So do that a couple of times. Yeah. You're shortening it. Yeah. Dawn, you're shortening it.
Yeah.
And then you're lengthening it. But you're making it a psoas event. Yeah, you're shortening from here to here, and you're lengthening from here to here.
What's the pushing off?
Even though you get
Not the yoga person.
So if you're a yoga practitioner, you can really change your yoga practice by accessing your psoas. Yeah. Good. All right. So that's all that I will say in my talk. And if you have some questions, we'll, yes.
My abdominals, I'm using my hip flexor.
Right.
So when I was coming up, just pulling on my spine.
Yes.
And I found that out later.
Yes.
Because
Because it's attached to your disc.
Yes. Yeah, I found out that the hard way.
Yeah.
And so I had pretty much sciatica. Like I had a nerve pain going down my leg, and I'm sort of recovering. And now, as you were saying, like sort of tighten that transverse or whatever. Whenever I do that and really tighten it, I feel some pain in my spine. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, like, maybe
Stay
what can I do? Yeah. Like
Stay
what-
with the first few pieces of the protocol until the pain decreases. So there's some passive, some restorative kind of poses. There's some really subtle movement, and in my experience, that's the first step in working with a herniated disc, because that, as you learned, it can pull a disc out. And so part of the rehab is just softening the psoas and then starting to slowly work with elongation of the spine, so that, and sometimes you can actually get the disc to go back in with subtle movement.
So stretching the muscle?
Not stretching.
Not stretching.
Not stretching. No, not stretching.
So what?
No.
Like,
So the protocol in the
I'll
book,
look at your
yeah, the
book.
protocol in the book is finding it, softening it, and hydrating it, and then really subtle elongation of it is way before stretching. Like stretching is only really for healthy psoas muscles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and one thing I should say is that in the yoga world there's this epidemic of labral tears and SI joint problems and people getting hip, famous teachers getting hip replacements, and a lot of that is from yanking bodies into positions that they shouldn't be in for that long, but also because the psoas can get so tight. Yeah, so, or just imbalanced,
Yeah.
because that's another piece of the protocol is side to side balance, because usually one side of the psoas is going to be different than the other, and so you have to treat them very differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a result, I actually went to become a personal trainer to learn more about it.
Uh-huh.
Like, I don't want to hurt myself again, so
Good.
I'm really interested.
Yeah, okay. Well, like I say, the book is, there is yoga in the book, but the protocol itself is a lot of micro movement, small movements, aware movements that you then take into postures. Yeah, yeah, good. Anyone else? Yes.
I have a question that I don't know how to ask it really, but you mentioned earlier about a patient of yours who would always get troubles
Right.
when her period came, and I was curious about the relationship between this physical muscle that we experience and emotions. Like, how do you see them working together?
Well, because the psoas is the fight or flight muscle, whenever we get a small amount or a big amount of perceived danger, then it will immediately contract. Yeah.
So that's what TRE is
Yes.
based on.
Yes,
so
it
it's
is.
a little bit like unconscious.
Definitely unconscious. Yeah. Yeah. But also, you see, because like I said in my training, we did 25-30 hours. So the psoas is the great compensator. So if you have an internal belief, say if you grew up feeling victimized, then your body will take on a victim stance. But even if it might not be the outer stance, but it might be the inner stance, because they can be different. Yeah. So you might be. So it's very tied into the whole Stephen Porges polyvagal theory, the psoas, and so emotions are part of our belief system, our upbringing, our culture, and our thoughts, right? And our psoas sort of supports that. So if we have the belief system that we're a victim, then the psoas will accommodate that and either show that internally, or you've seen that externally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard it, I don't know if you said it today, but I've heard it being also called the muscle of the soul.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably because it's deep.
Well, it certainly has something to do with being your authentic self. Yeah, definitely. And like I said, when you continually work with a sense of being connected through your body, then you start feeling sometimes more connected to others, to your community, and to that which is greater than you. Because it patterns that. It patterns connection. It patterns, like if we had the whole workshop, we'd be working with the arms and the legs and the head.
So if you don't mind me continuing, so the reason why I'm asking this is because I was widowed like this without any warning.
Uh-huh.
And then my therapist suggested that I should try yoga, which I did and fell in love. But there was a time when I was afraid to go to yoga because I had heard that people have big
Emotional releases.
So I thought if I walk into a yoga class, I'm going to explode like a bomb and I don't know what to do about it.
Did you?
I never did.
It comes when it needs to come.
11 years ago. So
Yeah, it comes when it needs to come. And, you know, it doesn't have,
process the emotions.
Yeah.
Not in a yoga class unexpectedly.
yeah, that's, sounds like you've been doing exactly what you needed to do. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Could I just ask how you present to people? Because I teach this all the time, my students, but convincing people that coming to a class where you're just going to be softly flowing and feeling your psoas.
Yeah. Well,
Really
you
hard.
see, I put myself out that way.
Yeah,
I don't teach vinyasa.
neither do I.
I
Yeah.
don't teach regular yoga classes. I deal with, you know, the sick and wounded. And so I just say right up front that this is the way I work, and this is why this is the way I work.
Yeah.
And then I read the energy of the class, right? So sometimes we do need to get up and move more, but I always structure a class so that I do some experiential anatomy, some how does that tie into the other koshas, or you know, a piece of philosophy or something, and how can we bring that into the practice?
It might just be my perception of Vancouver because
Yeah. Oh, no, it's hard.
This is what I do, but it's like trying,
Yeah,
maybe because I'm in such a small space too, but.
yeah,
just kinda go,
yeah. It's not. No,
Beautiful,
people want.
love it,
We
love
see,
it.
and so I was mentioning that the psoas is like a sensory organ because it's so full of nerve endings, and that's also part of picking up emotions, because it'll pick up emotions from the gut brain. But where was I going to go with that one? Yeah, it picks up emotions, and so we have to honor that. And so I just
Keep plugging at it.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, I have a dedicated yoga therapy studio in White Rock, and so people know that.
Yes, now I know you.
Hmm?
Now I know who you are.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say
Yeah.
about the sensory aspect, which is that when it's tight, then it's compressing those sensory nerves, and so we get cut off from ourselves. And often people in trauma, well, it's documented research-wise that people who are dealing with trauma do not have a well-defined sense of center. And so this is one of the best ways I know, because it's titrated, you know, so that keeps it fairly safe. It's physical, you know, we can say it's a physical structure, and it will help you feel more solid, you know. And so we know that with people who have suffered trauma, that it's very helpful to feel more grounded, to feel more centered, to have a sense of connection. So that's what the psoas does. Yeah. Anyone else?
I would like to add that I really thank you for writing this book. I have been weekly with two special people who have worked under you, Cheryl and Suzanne.
Suzanne. Oh.
So I've seen them, you know, maybe 3 days of the week.
Okay.
And we're working from your book.
Okay.
And they have done a marvelous job with helping me understand the internal process of movement, but not necessarily great.
Grand movements.
Yes.
Yes.
And internalizing it and understanding, feeling that psoas, learning, being introduced to it and discovering it and nurturing it.
Nurturing it, exactly.
Yeah. And it's a trusting feeling once you
Yeah.
discovered it's
Reliable.
Yes, and it's something that no one else can do for you.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
You can feel it and you can access it in a second if you need to. You know, when you find yourself giving up your power or going into fear or whatever, it's like, okay, here I am.
And it's given me some immense relief from fear and just learning to trust.
Yeah.
And having fun, you know, again, it's just a really wonderful thing to have this ongoing
Relationship.
and to have taught you have your experience has shown someone dedicated to share with the rest of the people as they go forward in their practice. It's become one of my favorite things is
Thank you.
I have this book now, and you know, if it wasn't for them to interpret it, you know, help me, you know, I'd be farther, I wouldn't be as far along.
Yeah. And the next book will be a workbook based on this. Yeah. Yeah, like a 10 or 12 week workbook. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's the best promotion I could ever hope for. Yeah. And just one last thing. We are a society that's addicted to strong sensation. And so we get a lot of yoga classes that are really strong, or we do that movement, this like, and then we rip our, you know, we herniate our disc. And so it's really about finding the compassionate presence. And compassionate presence is never violent. Yeah.
I wanted to comment with this young lady here. For years, Leila has been trying to get me to go to yoga. And I've gone to several different people. And I said, no, you're not getting me into any yoga class. It is deadly. My body is in so much pain. And finally, the place that she had recommended, I thought, all right, I'll give this one last try. It was the best thing I ever did. And it was so gentle. And because I'm so strong-willed, I thought, I'm really have to move, right? But you don't. I actually could feel that gentleness. So hang in there, trust.
Yeah.
You're doing a good job.
Yeah, and her teacher trained with Suzanne and Cheryl.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
for coming.